brain health. I know that this month slash time of year can be especially stressful for many people, along with just the general stress and chaos that is often a part of being a human being. And so I wanted to talk about first of all, we'll talk a little bit about some of the positives of stress actually, so that you can stress a little bit less about stress, but also discuss ways to help manage stress when it becomes overwhelming or potentially harmful to our health. So yeah, let's get started. If my slides will change. There we go. I think it's good to just start off with a basic definition of stress because it can be defined differently depending on whom you speak to. But at LEAP in our program, we specifically define stress as being our physical and emotional response to challenging or threatening situations. We distinguish between a stressor, which is the active thing or situation causing the stress, and then the stress response, which is how our body and brain respond to the stress. Usually when we're using the word stress itself, it's shorthand for the stress response, not the stressor. And this distinction may come in handy when we talk about different types of stress response slides. I wanted to mention that stress can occur both in response to positive events as well as in response to negative events or more challenging events. And an example of this would be perhaps that you got a new job and you're actually really excited about it and looking forward to that job. But some of that excitement also translates into or is mixed with anxiety. Even sort of another maybe good example of this would be a time that when I went to Disney World in like 6th grade, and of course this is a bit of a silly example, but I remember being so excited and also kind of anxious about making sure I had all my stuff together and what we were going to do that I couldn't sleep. And so that's kind of a concrete example of the body responding in a stress-related way to a positive situation. And I just wanted to sort of mention that to frame this idea of stress. That said, when we're talking about stress, we will generally be talking about situations in life that are difficult. We do all face different stressors at many different intensities, and I want to acknowledge that each person's experience of stress, as well as the stressors we face, are unique. I thought I would talk about some misconceptions that people may have about stress and the brain before we start out today. Some people believe, and this is understandable, that stress is always bad for your brain. And this is not the case. And I will talk a bit about exactly how our stress responses work to kind of address this misconception. But overall, while large levels of stress over a long period of time can be harmful, lower levels of stress over shorter periods can actually be adaptive. So relatedly, when we're trying to help protect our brain or body health, we actually are not aiming to lower our stress levels to zero, which, because we're human beings, would essentially be impossible. Rather, it's about experiencing or creating a more manageable level of stress. In addition, stress often, though not always, feels like it's mainly a mental or psychological response, and this can be the case, but it is not exclusively psychological or mental. It also highly involves several body systems, and I'll talk about that a bit as well. Also, I think it's easy to kind of believe that if we can push through severe stress levels, if we're still functioning in our daily life, that is the primary marker of whether or not stress is affecting our health. And unfortunately, this is not the case. While we can sometimes push through that severe stress, it can still have a negative impact on our brain health. And I just wanted to put that out there so we keep that in mind when talking about the effects of stress on brain health. I'm going to share some information about the two main types of stress responses. We're going to talk about both the fight or flight response, our shorter term response. This also sometimes includes concepts such as fawn and freeze, which are also valid immediate stress responses, but have some slightly different mechanisms, so I won't go deeply into those right now. I'll call it fight and flight for now. And then in addition, we'll go over the HPA response, or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal response, which is our longer term stress response. And we can really explore the function of both of these as well as how they affect our brain and body. The fight or flight response is our instant reaction to a threat or perceived threat. For example, if you have ever, well, I hope this has not happened, but hypothetically, if you're crossing the street, there's an oncoming car that maybe wasn't supposed to be coming that way at that time, and you find that you've stepped back really quickly to avoid that vehicle before you even noticed that you reacted. That helpful response be a product of the fight or flight response. It starts instantly, though it can then continue typically between seconds and minutes. And the primary hormone in this response is adrenaline. Adrenaline is responsible for a variety of physical and mental changes. So higher heart rate, higher blood pressure, a burst of energy that comes from having glucose or blood sugar made quickly available, as well as sweating and dilated pupils, which is why I included that image there. The mental changes that occur, and of course, this overlaps with the physical changes, they're not clear categories, but we often feel a strong sense of fear or anxiety, a sense of urgency, as well as heightened alertness, especially to the threat or perceived threat at hand. Now, the reason, quote unquote, why we have this response is because it does allow us to respond very quickly to a stressor. Now, this may or may not be adaptive given the specific situation. Having that high level of response could help with that example with the car. But for example, experiencing a fight or flight response before giving a presentation, depending on the circumstance, could make it a bit more difficult to perform if you're so wired that it becomes kind of hard to continue. So it does depend, but in general, that really quick response to the stressor, that can vary, is that primary benefit of our fight or flight response. It decreases our reaction time, making us able to respond very quickly. Our vision and hearing can actually become sharper when we experience this response, which I find really interesting. And as I was saying, we have more energy instantly available in the form of blood sugar, blood glucose to face that threat or challenge. In addition, it's worth noting that the fight or flight response can also temporarily boost memory formation. Now, this doesn't mean that I think it's a good idea for us to try and trigger that fight or flight response to boost our memory, because it can be selective. It typically helps you remember the situation at hand or things related to it, but makes it harder to remember other things that are going on or encode other things going on. However, it's just worth noting that at least in a sense, that could be considered a bit of a brain benefit of our fight or flight response. So that's some information about that more instant fight or flight response. And now I'll share some details about our longer, more gradual HPA or hypothalamic pituitary adrenal response. The HPA response, as you can see in that little infographic to the right, involves primarily the hypothalamus, a region of the brain, the pituitary gland, another region of the brain, and the adrenal glands, which sit on top of our kidneys and are involved in the production of adrenaline, but especially cortisol in the case of this reaction. And so the HPA response, to me, this is the most interesting one. It is a delayed and gradual reaction to stressors as opposed to the fight or flight response, which is instant. By delayed, I mean that when this response begins or ramps up, it's not like several hours, it's typically a few minutes when your body, and especially those three different key areas that I mentioned, are working in synchrony to start producing the stress hormone cortisol, which starts gradually affecting your response to the stressor. So this response, once it started kicking in, has a longer duration typically than the fight or flight response. It can last between minutes and weeks, and importantly, it happens by degrees. So unlike the fight or flight response, which is instantaneous and either on or off, the HPA response can build and build gradually, and I'm guessing can also somewhat decrease gradually. The shorter term effects of this response are very similar to the fight or flight response, but typically less intense in nature. So you might feel some heightened alertness and anxiety instead of that intense fear. You might sweat a bit, but not have that sort of full-on sweating or shaking that's produced by the fight or flight response. It does also have some longer term effects on the body that I will discuss in a little bit. The HPA response, at least in ideal situations, really does help us build a sustained response to the stressor, whatever that may be. It can help us increase our focus and attention, especially in relation to the specific stressor that we're facing, but it also does increase alertness in general. And it does provide, at least to an extent, a bit of a longer energy boost to help deal with the threat or the challenge. Now, if you're stressing about something that is outside of your control, which unfortunately happens with many stressors that we face, this may not be as adaptive, so it's still situational. But overall, there are some pretty clear benefits to our at least shorter term functioning and handling the stressor when it comes to the HPA response. I also thought you might be interested in learning about the idea of hormesis. This might sound kind of random, but it's a theory that I was reading about somewhat recently that applies in general to how stress can be beneficial to the body in some cases, but more specifically, how some stressful activities can create adaptive changes in the brain. And this would tend to be in situations where we have that sort of slower burn or at least lower-ish levels of stress with the HPA response, as opposed to with that really, really strong immediate response. So this is, of course, mixed with some other benefits of these activities that make it a little hard to distinguish between those benefits and the effect of stress itself. But for example, exercise is considered to be a physically and sometimes mentally stressful activity, but we know that exercising frequently, when it's not, for example, excessive, does help rewire our brain, form new connections that support general brain health, and can also help us produce new neurons in the brain. Similarly, when we're enjoying but still perhaps stressing a bit over more demanding or challenging hobbies or projects, say at work, we know that that challenge also helps us form new connections in the brain, here specifically related to the task or the skills related to that task, and that sort of the pressure of that challenge can help accelerate the rate of learning. So in short, stress to an extent can help accelerate the rate of learning and promote some positive changes in the brain. And I just wanted to mention that as a potential benefit before we get into some of the drawbacks of stress as well. Let's talk about when stress can become harmful to the brain. So stress is highly linked to the hormone cortisol, especially the HPA response. The production of cortisol, which is also involved in many different other body systems and functions, is an essential part of the HPA stress response. The effect that this has in the short term is that it's actually anti-inflammatory. It suppresses our immune system. But in the longer term, cortisol increases inflammation. And this is one reason why we sometimes see different reactions physiologically and psychologically to that long-term HPA response, as opposed to when the response has just started out or if it's happening in the shorter term. So for example, that stronger sense of fear, excuse me for those notifications, but that stronger sense of fear that can happen both with the fight or flight response or sometimes in the earlier stages of that HPA response where there's strong increased alertness that can be adaptive, then can turn into sort of a lower grade anxiety and irritation and insomnia that becomes maladaptive. So that's an example of a change related to cortisol that does relate to that difference between cortisol being more anti-inflammatory in the short term and then increasing inflammation in the long term. But besides some of the psychological differences, that increased inflammation can lead to different potential health consequences. And this includes GI troubles, difficulty sleeping, as well as fatigue, and increased risk of neurological or neurodegenerative conditions, including dementia, or an increased risk of a higher rate of progression due to that increased level of systemic inflammation. In addition, It has been shown that in some cases, though not all, long-term very high cortisol levels can more directly harm the hippocampi. So the hippocampi are two little excuse me. I'm going to mute those notifications. I'm very sorry. But they're two little bits of the brain. They are sort of reflected across the main axis, the central axis, and they are very important for learning and memory. And so we know that for whatever reason, the hippocampus is especially susceptible to damage due to cortisol and can often be affected by very high cortisol levels. This usually presents as small amounts of shrinkage. But it's also true that according to research, this effect can often be reversed by practicing stress management activities, relieving the burden of stress, etc. So it is highly reversible in many cases. The goal of stress management is not to eliminate stress completely, but it's to maintain a level of stress that maximizes those potential benefits while minimizing harm. When we talk about stress management, we're specifically referring to a strategic use of both internal and external resources. So that's either modifying the situation, getting help with the situation, or working on potentially modifying your internal state and response to help reduce the negative effects of stress on the brain and the body. I want to highlight this, that stress management can be proactive. Everyone can benefit from stress management, even if you don't feel that you're currently experiencing levels of stress that are difficult to manage. By practicing stress management, you may have a more moderate stress response when more severe stress does come up in your life. I've put some of these stress management tools into three categories that I've called habituation, modifying the stressor, and modifying the stress response. And I will talk about what all of those mean. Habituation is an interesting sort of adaptation we have that can, depending on the situation, be used to reduce the burden of a particular stressor. Sometimes when we face a stressor repeatedly, our stress, specifically in relation to that stressor, can diminish over time. This depends both on the type of the stressor and on the individual facing the stressor, but it typically applies to stressors that are more predictable, more controlled, and that are not what I would call objectively threatening. So where your response, even though I understand that this is subjective, is maybe a little bit higher or more intense than what the situation is calling for. So some examples of where we can habituate to a stressor may include if you have a manageable increase in your workload that is producing some stress, but that you know you can still get through, for example, a smaller change in your schedule or environment, or even something like learning a new skill where it doesn't feel like there's much of a threat associated with it, but it still creates an increase in stress simply because it's challenging. By sort of accepting and practicing some of those necessary and not super threatening situations, we can actually boost our ability to habituate. Now, again, this tends to apply to what I would call smaller things that are not objectively threatening. However, I think it's just worth noting that habituating to some of these more minor stressors can help decrease the burden of stress in general. Another thing to do, of course, and I realize this is not always possible, but is to address the particular stressor. This can be either through modifying the stressor or reframing it. Modifying can include asking for help in dealing with that stressor, setting boundaries around the stressor, for example, when possible, only dealing with it or working through it, etc., during certain times of the day, though that's not always possible, or if possible, leaving a stressful situation completely. In addition, this may sound a bit cheesy and it can be very challenging depending on the stressor. It may not always be applicable, but reframing a stressor to find new meaning or value in it, if that feels appropriate to you, can really help decrease the burden of stress. There's evidence to show that if you take a stressful situation and you're able to frame it as perhaps being meaningful or valuable or teaching you something while still being very difficult, this can actively reduce the burden of stress on your brain. One example of reframing that's very specific is just that feelings of anxiety and excitement are sometimes similar. And so if you have a situation that is causing you anxiety, but is maybe a bit more benign, so an example would be giving a presentation, reframing that anxiety as excitement can help relieve the burden of stress on the brain as well. And it can also help relieve your general discomfort. Last but not least, when those other things are not possible, it is also possible, or it is rather possible, to modify our stress response, even when facing very challenging stressors. We know that stress triggers our sympathetic nervous system, and this is not the exact same thing as activating the fight or flight response or the HPA response, but they are sort of closely linked in a complex way. The physiological opposite of sympathetic nervous system activation is parasympathetic nervous system activation. We have both, and they have opposite functions in the body. So with the sympathetic nervous system, and this again relates to some of what's going on with those responses I was talking about, our heart rate is increased, our digestion is slowed to focus on the stressor, or rather to divert energy to facing the stressor. We have increases in those stress hormones, including cortisol and adrenaline. We have increases in alertness and lots more. And so then our parasympathetic nervous system is essentially the opposite. It has the opposite role. It can lower our heart rate. It facilitates our digestion. It promotes the creation or release of hormones such as melatonin and acetylcholine, that's a neurotransmitter. And it importantly helps promote relaxation. So we can decrease the intensity of our stress responses by actively triggering the parasympathetic nervous system. I wanted to mention that one reason why stress responses can become overwhelming, in addition to there simply being very overwhelming stressors, is that our HPA response can become a feedback loop. So the more that it is activated, the more that it also signals to our body to keep activating the response and ramping it up more and more. But we can think of these activities that I'll talk about essentially as circuit breakers to kind of stop that response for a little bit and break the feedback loop that can start happening when we face a lot of stress over an extended period of time. The activities in this category are mainly activities that you would think of as being relaxing. So it's things like practicing deep and slow breathing, drinking a hot drink. I actually have a hot drink right now, which was, I actually did not know about that one, and I find that interesting. Stretching can activate the parasympathetic nervous system while also releasing endorphins. Chewing gum, interestingly, can have this effect. Spending time in nature helps activate that parasympathetic nervous system. And in fact, it actually activates some of the same parts of the brain that are most highly active with meditation, which I find really interesting. Spending time with loved ones or those who support you, as well as with pets, can also help activate this response. Meditating, which I know is not everyone's cup of tea, but I personally quite like, has this effect, oftentimes quite strongly. And then the last thing I've put on the list, just as an example today, is progressive muscle relaxation. If you haven't heard of progressive muscle relaxation, what it entails is you essentially start either at the top or bottom of your body, you clench your muscles. For example, I could start clenching my neck, and then I'd clench my shoulders and then move down, releasing each time that you've clenched a particular muscle group. And this helps trigger a relaxation response throughout your whole body. These are just some examples, and essentially anything that you find relaxing that is not harmful to you will likely fall into this category, at least to some extent. I've just included examples of activities that are either more popular or that strongly have this effect. When possible, we do recommend intentionally using a relaxation technique at least once a day to help curb those excess stress levels. It can be just for a few minutes a day, but doing this once a day, and especially sort of being aware that you're intentionally implementing it as opposed to just experiencing these in your everyday life, which is also good, can help you sort of build a habit of stress management, even during very high stress periods. I wanted to talk a bit about how some of our other lifestyle habits, or whatever you'd like to call them, also influence stress. There are a lot of indirect effects of healthy habits on the level of our stress response. One key factor, if it's something that you're able to do, is exercise. Exercise has been shown to make a really huge difference in our stress response and stress levels, as well as being excellent for the brain and body. So if you're able to make exercise a habit, that can have a big impact on your stress levels. So can prioritizing sleep, which can be difficult when we're facing high stress, but I believe is still vital to do. So trying to, for example, not use screens 30 minutes or an hour before going to sleep can make a big difference. And then eating a brain healthy diet can really help reduce inflammation in our body and therefore help take the edge off of the inflammation that could be caused by an extended stress response. So we talk a lot more about this in our Mediterranean diet program, but some examples of what we call a brain healthy diet are a lower glycemic diet. So that means a diet that doesn't spike your blood sugar very strongly. Some things that you can include in your diet are good sources of healthy fats, such as omega-3s. So that might be salmon and olive oil and almonds. Good sources of fiber, that's many vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, as well as good sources of protein, can all help reduce the glycemic index or load of a meal. Nutrient density is also important for reducing inflammation. A lot of key nutrients are antioxidants, which means that they essentially work to actively reduce systemic inflammation in the body. And last but not least, I'm a little biased because caffeine has a strong effect on me. But if you find yourself feeling very stressed, cutting back a bit on your caffeine intake can have a big impact as well. Caffeine has positive brain health benefits. For example, it has been shown to improve cognition, but one of the ways that it works is that it ramps up your cortisol response. So it does directly play into our HPA response, or at least the production of that key stress hormone. So I hope you found this interesting. I talked a bit about the different effects of stress on the brain, its positives and negatives, as well as some of the specific stress responses we have, and as well as some ways to help manage our stress across a few different categories, including reframing, activating our parasympathetic nervous system, and others. And I hope that you found this interesting and helpful. If you enjoyed this presentation, I'd like to provide just a quick overview of some of our other LEAP offerings so you can be aware of them. In our Brain Health Bootcamp, this is our it's a 6-week course focused on various lifestyle factors and how they impact brain health. We cover stress as one of the topics in this course, as well as several others. And so the way that it works is that we meet once a week on Zoom. We'll be meeting from 1 to 2 p.m. starting this coming Monday, actually, that's going to be the 22nd. And we cover a key lifestyle area such as nutrition, sleep, or exercise, or stress management during that call. In addition, we provide a lot of videos and worksheets, as well as custom tailored goal setting support throughout this course. It's completely free, and I do invite you to sign up if you're interested at kubrainhealth.org/leap. Another program that we're offering right now is our Mediterranean diet course. This is a fully self-paced program where what happens is if you decide to join, we provide this comprehensive video library where each video covers a different key aspect of brain healthy eating. So we cover nutrient density and low glycemic eating, as I previously mentioned, as well as others. And in this program, we do also provide some additional recipes and resources. You can head over to kubrainhealth.org/leap to learn about either of these programs and to receive updates specifically about LEAP or about other things going on at the KU ADRC, such as community events and research. I highly, highly encourage you to head over to joinmyalliance.com, where you can sign up for our newsletter if you have not already. And that newsletter provides updates about all kinds of interesting things going on at the KU ADRC. Okay, thank you so much. That's what I have for you today. If you have any questions, you're welcome to email me directly at kuadrcleap@kumc.edu. And I'm happy to answer any questions now as well, if there are any questions. Thanks.
Yay, thank you so much, Rosie. Feel free, if you all have questions, to unmute yourselves or use the chat. And while I'll give you a moment to do that, I'll let you know that this is timely that Rosie mentioned the Mediterranean diet class, because next week's weekly webinar topic is about a new study that we have called the AVO-COG study. And AVO, of course, is short for avocados, which are have a pretty good reputation for being good for your brain and your heart and your overall well-being. And next week, we'll have our study investigators talking about the benefits, or the possible benefits, I should say, of avocados, and how we're looking for some folks who would be willing to participate in that trial. So come back next week and you'll hear some information about who's eligible and what we think about avocados and what we want to learn about them. So that'll be in Monday's My Alliance newsletter with more information. And Rosie, it looks like there's at least one question in the chat.
Yes,
So
I
I'll
can.
turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So one person had asked if there's a way to measure cortisol levels. This is a great question. Yes, you can measure, or rather your healthcare provider can measure cortisol levels in your saliva. This is typically used to diagnose adrenal disorders, which I am not super familiar with. I'm more familiar with the general stress prevention side of things. But if you speak with, for example, your PCP regarding any concerns you may have about your stress levels, they can measure your cortisol and provide some thoughts or feedback based on that. So yes, it is possible to measure cortisol levels. Someone asked if it's they said that they participated in the year-long LEAP program a couple of years ago. We have not yet published the results, but we're actively working on it, and we will be sure to provide a general update when that happens. Thank you for participating. Just one second. If we can't make all the live sessions in the bootcamp, will that deter someone from signing up? No, absolutely not. And I should have mentioned that. So thanks for bringing that up. If you choose to sign up, we provide recordings of every live session, and you will receive an email with a link to view that recording right after the recording is made available. So that will typically be on Monday afternoons. So I would absolutely encourage you to participate, even if you can't make some of the live sessions. And yes, Elizabeth Hunter Blank also mentioned the same thing. So yes, the recordings will be made available.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. And we'll have this recording up as soon as possible if you'd like to come back to it or share it with someone else. Next week, Thursday, 2 o'clock Central, we'll talk about the AVO-COG study. And we'll share information about eligibility and participation in that study in Monday's My Alliance newsletter. Rosie, Susan wants to know where to sign up for boot camp.
Yep, you can head over to kubrainhealth.org/leap. And I will put that in the chat again.
Good. All righty. I'll give Rosie a moment to put that in so anybody can copy that down if you like. Also, you should be able to see on your screens different ways to contact us for participating in research, joining My Alliance, talking about development, and we'll wrap up by saying, imagine what we can do together. because of course, all the research we're doing is toward the goal of postponing, preventing, eliminating dementia. And we're getting there. And it's always thanks to people who are generous enough to participate in our research and our development. So thank you everyone for being here. We'll see you next Thursday. Thank you again, Rosie, for very valuable information. I'm going to go have something hot to drink now, I think. All right, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.